Sohini Chattopadhyay, writer of this very wonderful book, The Day I Became a Runner, will give us a short presentation, and then we'll get into a conversation about the book, about her, about writing, and lots of other interesting things. We're just waiting for that. Over to you, Sohini.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Kerala Literature Festival. It's an honor to be in conversation with Miriam. I just discovered that Miriam has made a series on sportspersons as well. So since I also consider myself to be a film critic, a writer on film, this is a conversation that I'm looking forward to. So my book is, it's a history of India told through the lives of 9 women athletes. I begin in the late 1930s, and we travel to the current moment through the lives of these 9 women. I can see that the display here has my first slide, but I can't see it here. Anyway, I'll look at that. So I just wanted to give you a taster of the book and to introduce you to the central ideas animating the project, particularly that ambitious claim running through the middle of the cover, a women's history of India through the lens of sport. So I begin in the 1940s with Mary D'Souza. So that's Mary. She was a double international. That means she ran track for India, and she played hockey for India in the 1950s and the 1960s. That is the Indian team marching at the 1952 Helsinki Olympic opening ceremony. So she was part of the first Indian team that sent women to the Olympic Games. And if you look towards the center of that horizontal photograph, you'll see 4 women, or at least 3 women you'll be able to see, who are dressed in what looks like salwar kurtas, and that India is not a typo. That is apparently how the Finns spell India. So that's Mary. You can tell from the previous, You can tell this from the previous, I'm going the other way. Can I go back the presentation? Can I go back to the older slides? Can you do the other button? So we are on some other presentation altogether now. Anyway, I wanted to point out Mary's hairstyle. Yeah, so give us a moment. So Mary, Dolly Nazir, and Nilima Ghosh were in that vertical photograph, which is not this photograph, sir. So this slide is not a part of my presentation. Anyway, so Mary, Dolly Nazir, Nilima Ghosh, and Aarti Saha. How do I go back from here? Yeah. So that's Mary, and then, yeah, thank you so much. So you can tell that the one in the middle is Mary, and Dolly Nazir and Nilima Ghosh flank her. Dolly swam for, okay, great, yeah. So Dolly swam for India. Nilima also ran track. I couldn't find a picture of all 4 of them together for some reason, but the horizontal photograph is Aarti Saha. She also swam. And quizzers may know this, but she remains the youngest Indian ever at the Olympics at 11 years and some months. Also, again, something quizzers may know, the first Asian woman to swim across the English Channel. But my focus is not on swimmers or other sportswomen. It's only on athletes. Why? Because I think I argue that running is the most minimal sport. You don't need a team, you don't need any equipment. Until about 5 years ago, the Athletics Federation of India didn't even require you to wear shoes on the track. That's now changed. So I'm only looking at athletes. I'm traveling the decades from the late 1930s to this moment through the lives of 9 women athletes. But why a women's history of India through the lens of sport? Because sport gives women the legitimacy to cross the threshold from the private sphere of the home into the public sphere. In our women's citizenship, in the domestic sphere, at home is unquestioned. In our roles as wives and mothers, we are revered. But it's when we step out into the public sphere that our status as equal citizens is a lot less certain. We know this instinctively. I call this the Lakshman Rekha of citizenship. And sports, I argue, gives you the legitimacy to cross this Lakshman Rekha. Why? Because it is seen as performing for the nation. So this is a 3-tiered idea. The first tier of the idea is that sports and nationalism are inextricably related. Why do I say this? The high noon of nationalism is the turn of the 20th century, which is also the time that organized sport comes into being in a big way. So some dates, 1896 is the first edition of the modern Olympics. 1904, FIFA, which is the World Football Association, is set up. 1911 or 12, the International Tennis Association sets up its rules. Some decades before that, sometime in the 1870s, the first international test match is played between Australia and England. So as momentum is gathering for World War I, we already see nations lining up on the sports field. The other twin of sports and nationalism is cinema. I'm not really going to talk much about this except to say that 1895, again a date that quizzers may know, the premiere of the Lumiere brothers' Arrival of a Train in Paris. One more thing, both sport and cinema are enormous platforms for nationalism. The second tier of the idea is that men go to war, which is the most important performance of nationalism. Women largely don't. Even if some combat roles are being opened up to women today, it's a very, very tiny niche. So how do women perform nationalism? Historically, we've seen that the suffragist movement, everybody knows who the suffragists are, but just in case, they lobbied for women to get the vote. So historically, we see that the suffragist movement, very prominent in the UK, also in the US, they make major gains in 1918 and 1919. Why 1918 and 19? Because that is the end of the First World War, and women were seen as having done their duty when the men were at war. So there are lots of very interesting posters. This is from the US Library of Congress website, but I found this one particularly interesting. So you can make, it's very clear. So they're asking for stenographers, but you see in the background, you see a man in the trenches. So clearly, women are being called to hold fort while the men are in the trenches. I invite you all to look at the US Library of Congress website's posters. They're very interesting. And the third tier of this argument is that sports gives women an opportunity to perform nationalism. My book is broadly divided into 3 sections. The first section tells the stories of Mary D'Souza, Kamaljit Sandhu, who's the first Indian woman to win an individual gold outside India at the 1970 Bangkok Asian Games. Very, very significant time for India. If you're looking at the newspapers of the time, as I did, I spent a lot of time in the newspaper archives for this book. The news in India is very grim. Naxals are murdering bank managers, gherawing vice chancellors in West Bengal. There's an Air India strike. The cotton mill owners are angry because they don't have enough cotton. So remember, this is the time of the license Raj. And the clouds of what is going to be eventually the war of liberation of Bangladesh are already in the newspaper because the Awami League has won a big victory in what was then East Pakistan, and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's faction is not happy. So Kamaljit's win is a huge sign of cheer. She was one of the few women, I think one of only 2 women that you see on the news pages at the time, other than the Prime Minister. The other women you see are, the women in the textile ads or women feeding children tonics and syrups in pharmaceutical ads. And of course, I tell the story of P.T. Usha. Doesn't need any introduction here or anywhere else in India or maybe even Asia. Iconic sportswoman. So in this first section, I travel from the 1940s to the 1980s. The second section of the book is about 3 athletes who are called out for not being women enough. So I tell the stories of Shanti Soundarajan, who you see on the screen right now, one of the finest middle distance runners ever in India, won silver at the Asian Games in 2006, and then stripped of her medal for failing. At the time, it was called a gender test, but in my book I say this is the wrong language. It's essentially a sex test. I tell the story of Pinky Pramanik, who is not called out on the field, but accused of her housemate of rape. And I tell the story of Dutee Chand. I travel a very short period of time in this section, only from 2006 to 2015. But it was important for me to tell all these stories because the needle moves. So Shanti is dumped like a defective toy by the government of India after her failed sex test. Pinky wins her case at the Calcutta High Court. Dutee Chand, the government of India, goes to the Court of Arbitration in Sport at Lausanne, which is effectively the Supreme Court of Sport, and she wins her case and briefly changes the rules for the 2016 Olympic Games at Rio. So the needle moves even in that one decade. Very brief history of sports, a very, very unsettling history of sex tests, it's been there right from the beginning, but this is a really, really brief history. So in the beginning, it was called nude parades, which is exactly as it sounds. You walk naked in front of gynecologists and doctors. Then there were 2 chromosome tests. One is the Bar-Body test. Later, the SRY, the sex-determining region, another chromosome test. 1999, the era of compulsory sex testing is banned. So Shanti Soundarajan is actually the first athlete in the world to be called out after the era of compulsory sex testing is banned. What happens now is that somebody has to complain about you. That is when you're tested. So somebody complained about her. We don't know who. So that is the second section of the book. I have a little video from the Olympic channel for the next one. I just press this, right? To play it. It's not playing? It's an interesting episode from the 1936 Olympics. But if it's not playing, then we'll... Okay, we'll just skip ahead. Oh! There's no sound.
Would not allow Jewish people to take part in. That was the threat.
Margaret, she was living in England. She was told that if she didn't come back and try out for the German women's high jump team, that the German government would cause problems for her parents.
She didn't really want to return to Germany under those conditions, but
the Germans made me come back because I was the only one who was able to compete in the Olympics.
the token Jew.
A token Jew.
She really had no choice but to return and was reinstated to the German national team.
I think most scholars agree that it was a little bit of a setup.
As soon as the American team sailed for Germany, my mother was promptly sent a letter lamenting the inconsistency of her performance and dismissing her from the German Olympic team, with a nice Heil Hitler at the bottom.
The Germans could say, we tried to get a Jew to participate for Germany, but she just wasn't good enough.
I mean, I'm sure that it was always intended for show. And they never, ever intended that she would be on that team.
They didn't just fake her out, they faked the whole world out. They used her. It was incredibly elaborately contrived.
Well, there are some stories about the relationship between a young woman called Dora Ratjen and Gretel Bergmann. Dora Ratjen was found by the Nazi regime just in order to kick Gretel off the team.
Oh! Oh. Well, my roommate, Dora Ratjen, was a very interesting person.
My mother's always told me that she had quite a cordial relationship with Dora, even though she had, if not suspicion, some confusion about just who Dora was. Dora was very secretive. Dora was given a separate room in which to shower and dress.
I finally figured out what was going on.
It was discovered that Dora Ratjen was really Herman Ratjen, that she was, or he was, a man.
But you never saw Dora's...
I never saw her naked. And she went on to compete.
Dora Ratjen, Deutschland.
There's been so much speculation about whether Dora was a man or if Dora was gender ambiguous, but the fact is the Germans knew.
Yeah, so the fact is that the Germans knew, and the fact is that the government of India knew as well. I don't know if you, I don't want to risk going back to my previous slide again, but I had said that Shanti has won 12 international medals before the Asian Games silver that she was stripped off. So the government of India knew as well. I just want to add that Herman Ratjen had a very troubled life, was not a cheat. There are lots of blogs about Herman on the internet. When he was born, his parents thought that he was a girl. So if anybody cheated, it was the government, not him. The last section of the book is about long-distance running. I tell the story of Lalita Babar, who is first Indian woman to qualify for an Olympic track and field final after Usha, after 32 years. And one of the finest marathoners that India has produced. I also tell the story of the Sunrise Project, which is a long-distance training project for high school teenagers in rural Maharashtra. in Nanded. I just want to say that this section is broadly about India after liberalization. The scholar, the Marxist geographer David Harvey calls the marathon ecosystem a neoliberal ecosystem, and he observed that the big city marathons take off. So, New York, London, Tokyo start to take off in the late 1970s, which is when the welfare state begins to wither. So, in fact, the New York Marathon moves out of the Central Park and becomes a road race in 1976, which is the year that the New York municipality declares bankruptcy. So he uses this wonderful phrase, which I love, which is that marathons are a way to showcase gleaming bodies in gleaming cities. Then there's me, nothing like the other serious runners in the book. I'm a hobby runner shaped also by the neoliberal marathon ecosystem. And when I was putting this presentation together, I realized that this is also something that it's a motif from Forrest Gump as well, who was a runner. For those who are very young, this was a film made in the mid-90s, and then a Hindi film called Lal Singh Chaddha was made, I think, last year or the year before that. And I see my book as a story told in the Forrest Gump template, which is telling the story of a nation through a few lives intimately. Just wanted to say that whatever I took 100,000 plus words to say, Hindi cinema seems to be doing a better job of it, in the sense that you have that motif of wearing the nation repeatedly. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sohini. I don't know where to start, because now you've kind of covered everything in the book. I'm not sure what to ask you. I'm going to start with writing. This is your first book. You are, however, a very experienced writer. You've been a journalist, it's working, a critic, a sort of academic, I can call you.
Failed academic.
Well,
failed novelist.
Not yet. So you write for different forms. Does that engender a kind of fragmentation in you? Or is it easy for you to move from journalistic writing to the writing of a book? Is it easy to switch between the crafts?
This book I see as at least 50% of it would be what I call literary reportage. So I do practice long-form narrative reporting. So I do have that in this book as well. There's a little bit of memoir, and there's, I think, 25% or 30% of it is cultural criticism. So cultural criticism is also something I do in my practice as a writer, because I am a film critic or a cultural critic. So no, I don't. I don't think of... I see this as a book of journalism and reportage too.
Oh, no, it is. I just wondered whether there's a difference between when you write, say, for a newspaper or for a magazine or here for a book.
Yes, I mean, one thing is, of course, the time. It took me 8.5 years to finish this book. Mostly I have submitted my writing. I think I've submitted I've kept every deadline as a reporter. In fact, I've kept my deadlines as a writer as well. It's just that nobody could see the worth of, like, what is the why should this be a book is what
Took the time.
people felt. Yeah. So one is time, but the other thing is that as a reporter, we should be, and that's a good thing, dealing in facts. As a writer, I decided that there was a lot that my interviewees did not tell me. So I gave myself the room to distinguish between fact and truth. So there was a bit of, and this is not making up, but I did interpret pauses. I did try to absolutely back up interview material with second, third. I mean, I tried to back it up with as much other research from newspapers by talking to many others, so coaches, childhood PT teachers, school teachers. But I think a longer project gives you more room to interpret and to distinguish between, I think, fact and truth.
So one of the other things I noticed is you put yourself squarely in this narrative. You are right there in it. What was that like? Because that's not what you normally do in your journalistic life or in your film critic, cultural critic life, is it?
No, I mean, mostly not, although reviewing or criticism is subjective. So,
Sure.
So there is a bit of
But you don't talk
sense
about yourself. Here you do, quite
yeah.
up front and center.
Yeah, I mean, one is because of the idea of, reading citizenship through the lens of sport is something that I felt it bodily. When I used to run in Delhi, I used to feel it on the skin. So I felt like I have to braid this story myself. I have to tell it myself. And the other one is, unfortunately, nobody gave me a sports reporting job. So it was the only way. So I didn't, get the opportunities that, say, Prajwal Hegde or a Sharda Ugra have got, which is 30 years of watching sport live. And that's a different kind of, there's so much that you can get from observing live. So I had to embed my reporting in a different way. I think Sharda Ugra would have written a very different book if she did this book, because she has a wealth of observation and just watching things unfold in front of her. So I had to bring in something else to make up for that. So I thought one way of doing it is, since I'm not a sports reporter, is to tell it from, what my body tells me. And I felt like I understood lots of things that sports women in particular are not comfortable sharing, which is, for instance, Lalita Babar has largely not spoken about a long, niggling knee issue rather, which no machine can pick up. It's a sort of a phantom whisper of something, but she's no longer the athlete that she was before Rio 2016. Now, these are things that are hard to articulate because it can sound like an excuse. And it's a really hard life to be a sports person. I think anything other than, the elite cricketers, it's a really hard life to be. Or maybe, if you're a very top level badminton player today, it may be slightly easier. It's a hard, so I can understand why they would be reluctant to share these things. But I think the diary of my body as a hobby runner gave me that material. It made me able to pick these things up.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like the fact that you put yourself in the middle because it gives us a kind of reference point from which to understand these women. All of them very different. Which brings me to what you were talking about earlier on sport and nationalism. These are women from different parts of the country, different cultures, different languages. But one of them in particular is P.T. Usha, our daughter of our Kerala soil. In terms of the nationalism question and the political question and the politics question, Usha stands out because none of the others have really gone down that path, and she has. And you make very clear what you think about it, how you feel about it as a person, as an individual. But then you say that you also came to terms with who she was by kind of running on Calicut Beach and allowing yourself to feel the kind of freedom that she has made possible in Kerala.
Or in India, I mean, even in Delhi, people would sometimes refer to me as Usha, and there's nothing at all similar between me and Usha. I mean, she's a world-class athlete, gazelle-like in her best days, and I just put one foot after another. But I think it was just, I think the act of putting one foot after, I mean, that is the kind of impression that she has.
Yeah, and she's had for a long while.
She continues to have it. I mean, as a sports person, I think she's earned it.
Of course.
Yeah. But I try to grapple with.
So tell me about grappling with that. What is that like? What was that like for you? Because having, if you're a journalist, you're covering it. But having put yourself into this story, what was that like to deal with?
So, I mean, let me begin with this slightly boring disclaimer. I think that the lives of sports people in India are very hard. Yes. And you may be a champion, but whether you're going to the next tournament or not depends on a signature on your form.
Of a Babu somewhere.
Babu, Bibi, whatever. But you need those signatures. In that sense, it reminds me of academia. It's like a closed, imprisoned structure. Your supervisor has to sign off. So it's hard. And it's easier for me and for us to make this distinction between nation and government. But it's not such an easy distinction to make. And sport is always played for the flag. I tried to highlight that. Absolutely. So it is not such an easy distinction to make, particularly for people who are not privileged enough to get good quality
to education. Afford their own training, education, all of
that. So let me begin with that disclaimer. Then the other thing I think is that sports, by its very nature, like cinema, this is like, it appeals to the irrational part of our brain. So we love, irrationally we see somebody, and we think that we sort of project ourselves onto those 11 people who are playing on the television screen, or Usha, or we see, I mean, we imagine them to have qualities that we want them to have. Because sport and cinema are which is it the left part of the brain which is irrational or the right part? They're appealing to.
I don't think either are irrational. I think one's just creative and one's so.
Okay. No, one is emotional and one. So
yes.
So that's why this thing happens, because I think film stars often say this, right? Why are we expected to have political views? It's so naive to expect us to be like Hollywood contemporaries. Don't you understand the difference between America and... Film stars often say this, right? But I think we expect them because we love them irrationally, and so we're projecting onto them. There are very few sports people in the world. I think I can count them on the fingers of one hand. So obviously Muhammad Ali. Then there is this soccer player called Socrates, known as Socrates. Our Bishan Singh Bedi, of course. and
Jesse Owens.
yes, I mean, I would put Jesse Owens aside and say that, I mean, to go against your own government or to be able to call out your own, like what Ali did with the American government and criticized the war in Vietnam, or Bishan Bedi would often criticize government. There's this woman in the last chapter of my book. So Ila Mitra I would consider to be very much a part of this select league of sports people who could rise above government and speak for the highest ideals of sport. So good place to speak about Ila because, you know, she would have been the first Indian origin woman to represent India at the Olympics if the 1940 games were not cancelled for World War II. Went on to become a Communist Party of India leader, did a lot of relief work in the 1943 to 45 Bengal famine, is possibly the first woman in the subcontinent to articulate the experience of being raped in a public forum when she talked about custodial rape. So she was arrested for the murder of 4 policemen in Nachol district in formerly East Pakistan, what is now Bangladesh, as a Tebhaga leader. The Tebhaga movement asked, well, farmers said that we will not give you half of our produce. We will not give zamindars half of our produce. We'll give 1/3. So 3 bhag, so it came from that, Tebhaga. She was one of the leaders of that. It arose out of the hunger of the Bengal famine, the memories of that hunger. She was raped in Nachol prison. So first she was administered what is known as the Pakistani injection, which is that 2 sticks, so your legs are crushed between 2 sticks. Then the jailer called for 4 steaming boiled eggs, which were placed in her vagina, and then she was gang raped. So she articulated this in her testimony, in her Jabanbandi, which is what we call testimony in Bangla, at Rajshahi Court in 1951, and
you
nobody.
need to give people something to read. If you tell them everything in your book, they'll have nothing left to read.
But nobody came forth to give testimony against her. The case against her remained till 1971. She came away to Calcutta for medical parole and then continued to be a legislator for West Bengal. And so served the citizens of both nations, of East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, and India. So I would count her among this handful of sports people who could distinguish between government and nation and citizens.
So you mentioned earlier the kind of lofty subtitle of the book. And when I picked up the book, I was a little worried. I was like, that's a tall claim. But you managed to rise up to it. And I think what I enjoyed most about the book was actually getting a sense of Mufassal India through the ages. You know what I mean? Something that those of us who are urban, privileged, really don't get to see or understand unless we travel out. And you do that really well, and you do that with a very light touch without it becoming sort of, you know.
Thank you.
And I enjoyed that very much, and so I was glad to see you manage to do that. But, you know, you talk about sometimes how difficult it was getting to these places, being the person you are, and trying to get people there to not view you with suspicion, to be open and speak to you. Talk a bit about that.
See, that anyway is something that I think I'm
I mean,
acquainted
you do that
with as a
journalist.
reporter. And I mean, I'm very much aware of my many access of privileges, you know, urban, Anglophone, fairly wealthy, and
But
of course
did it-
upper
did it-
caste.
Was it a hurdle?
I mean, it always is, and it was no different for this, the reporting in this book as it is for any of my. If I think most reporters who are from similar backgrounds, and many English language reporters are from, would acknowledge that these are barriers to. The perfect interview, if there is such a thing as the perfect interview. But I've been getting, this is where, I allowed myself the room for interpretations. I was making the difference between truth and fact. So as a reporter, if I were writing for a newspaper or a magazine, I would stick to the facts. So there was no time for that kind of interpretation either. So one is that, but after the book has come out, there was a very interesting panel discussion, which I was not able to attend because I was doing a little bit of teaching here. But Lalita Babar was invited to a festival to speak about this book. And she said, in the book, I talk about the district, very briefly, the district she comes from having a problem of female feticide, which her school principal and the school clerk told me. But in a panel discussion recently about this book, she says that the sister right after her was named Nakusha, which apparently in Marathi means unwanted. And it is a very common name in their district. And it means unwanted. Now, please, there should be a son. There should be a son. And I got a fair amount. I managed to get a fair amount of time with each athlete. I think about 7 to 10 days. We discussed gender discrimination. She never mentioned this. So I'm thinking that this is an endorsement for my book, actually, because she's now speaking about this, that her own sister was called Nakusha. And so I'm thinking that, okay, my exercise in interpreting truth was fruitful.
Absolutely. So you talk, the middle section of your book, as you put it, not woman enough.
Yeah.
So, growing up as a Suryani, Christiani, Malayali, my relatives always called me a Marate Keri, which is a tree climber, which really is not something a girl should do, right? It's deviant behavior for a girl. The three women you talk about here were seen as deviant for reasons other than their behavior. But for the other women that you interviewed, the very fact that they chose to get out there, put their bodies on public display, which is something Indian women are not supposed to do unless you're a courtesan or a runner, right? Talk to me a bit about that. What's that like for a sportswoman, especially an individual athlete versus somebody in a cricket team or a hockey team or...
You mean the act of putting yourself out there, or their
the act of
views
putting yourself out there in a society that doesn't take to it kindly?
That is the premise that was one of the, that is the central premise of the book, actually, that a woman running or walking in public space is a direct challenge to patriarchy, or as I call it, the gross public gaze.
But why is it then, say, for example, that a woman construction worker whose body and physicality is on public display doesn't engender the same feeling?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose you are certainly domestic workers and also the blue-collar working class is sort of invisibilized in a way. We, in our minds, I mean, they are very visible if we look, but we do invisibilize. So many of the things I would say, many of the restrictions that apply to women, or many of the things that were in my head, will I be attacked with acid? It's absolutely true that a lot of working class women walk on the same streets as I do, and they probably also, I mean, there's no reason to think that they don't deal with those threats. But so there definitely is, if you're asking me, is there a class lens to the book? Definitely there is a class lens to the book.
That was my next question. You deal with class, you deal with caste, you deal with gender, sort of politics with a small p.
Small p, okay.
Small p. Okay, why is it we don't have enough runners still in India, women runners?
But we do, we do. If you look at the numbers, so I was doing a piece recently for Sam. If you look at the numbers from marathon registrations, they've been going up. So that, at one level, those numbers are going up. The number that's not going up is the female labor force participation rate.
It's going down.
It's been fairly stubbornly low. But, I wish I had a clearer answer. I'm trying to understand this myself. Numbers are going up. And the fact that sports offers, in fact, I gently try to suggest, without saying so, that sports may be a more viable ladder of social mobility for... Oh, okay. Some very melodic voices, yeah. So it may be a more viable ladder of social mobility. Although I don't know, I am very, very, very depressed by the wrestlers' protest and what it means, and I can't think of, if my daughter or sister was Sakshi Malik, I can't imagine wanting to send a child out to, play sport and get a job. That is the route, actually, that sports quota, grade 4 government job. But I'm very depressed. Some of my friends are saying that's a great beginning because at least these things are now being discussed. But I think it's been so depressing because the demand was so small.
So basic.
They didn't ask for the legislator to be. They just said, can he not be the wrestling federation chief? That's all. So I think it's a very depressing moment. But yeah, why? If you're saying why do we not have a more number of runners? We seem to have more women in sport now. It seems like that. If you look at just marathon registrations or...
But marathons are very specific in the fact that those who are registering for marathons are urban, well-off women who do this as a hobby sport. I'm talking about the PT Ushas. Why do we not have
Lalita
more
also
of them?
ran marathon. So one thing I should say, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Miriam, but while I follow Marxist lens of analysis, and I like David Harvey's reading as a neoliberal ecosystem, marathon ecosystem. I agree with it. But in my own reporting, I found that while rural Maharashtra, for instance, which has a long-distance running subculture, absolutely impoverished by post-liberalization strategies, absolute jobless growth, but it's also true that it gives these marathons have very high cash incentives. So you can come 10th in the Indian category among women and get some 50,000 rupees. These are very big incentives if you are from an impoverished home in Marathwada. Lalita is not from Marathwada, but she's from a drought-prone region in Satara, which gets both a lot of rain and drought.
No rain.
Yeah. So it, the year I got my national award, there was two instances when all of Vigyan Bhavan stood up to give a standing ovation. One was the Dada Saheb Phalke for Rajinikanth. The other one was this woman called Lata Bhagwankare, who wore this nylon sari, plastic slippers, and you could tell by sadly you could tell by her clothes. I hate to say this phrase because it has bad connotations, but the entire audience all of Vigyan Bhavan rose up to give her an ovation because she was clearly not one of the usual winners. And Lata Bhagwankare has a Marathi movie named, it's called Lata Bhagwankare. It's a film about her. She started running marathons after the age of 60 to pay for her husband's treatment. Now, while I have immense, the only selfie I took at the National Awards is with Lata Bhagwankare. Immense respect for her. But to me, it is a sign of a criminal society if you have to run a marathon to pay for somebody's treatment.
Yes.
So both these things at the same time, it has enabled her husband to stay alive. So both these things are there.
Are true.
About the marathon. So I'm just intervening to tell you that, it is urban women who are registering, paying 5,000 rupees or 7,000 rupees to run the Mumbai. But it's also a Lalita Babbar. There's also a Lata Bhagwankare.
Okay, I shall look out for those.
Certainly as a filmmaker, you may want to look out for Lata. I think it's like, what a story. I mean,
It's an incredible
hats
story.
off to her, but what a horrible thing.
So I wanted to end, before we ask questions, with a little chat about Shanti. You dedicate the book to her. Reading that chapter was really difficult for me. I think we have behaved abominably as a nation with her. What do you think her future looks like in sport? I know she has this job now, she does some training, but do you think we'll ever do right by her? Do you think any government, anybody will do right by her?
I have to again give boring and straight answer right away, which is that, the Karunanidhi government gave her 5 or 15 lakh rupees immediately. So one government did. So, while the government of India dumped her like a broken toy, Karunanidhi went ahead, and I think it's important to say that.
Yeah.
Recognized her as the first Tamilian to win an individual medal at the Asian Games. And she's from, she's a Sri Lankan Tamil. She's the daughter of a refugee.
Yeah.
It's important to say, I know it's not the answer.
But to be fair, the Tamil Nadu government is not in charge of sport and international sport and competitions.
The job she has now is again with the Tamil Nadu. This is a different,
But
this is the Amma government.
I'm asking because the people who dumped her, the official who just left her in a room with
These
four
are government
strangers.
of India officials,
These are
yeah.
this is government of India. They're the ones in charge of this.
And nobody spoke. I saw my mails being opened, but no responses to the emails till date.
Really?
Yes. The SAI Director General didn't respond to me.
So they're just pretending like Shanti never
It's just
happened.
stonewalling, yeah. So Shanti now, I feel, of course, she has this Tamil Nadu government job, but daily, there is this threat of I'm so disappointed to say this because I love Tamil films, I love Tamil people, I love discussing. It's my favorite state to travel in as a reporter. I feel very comfortable. But there are these Tamil gossip magazines like Kumudam and Tamil TV channels which are so nasty and so vicious about the stories that they tell about. And this happens regularly, every year, every few months. that Shanti is a freak, Shanti is a pedophile, Shanti is because she trains young women for the Tamil Nadu government. So it's a very difficult, and she's at physical threat. She can be beaten up because even now Shanti supports some 5-6 students, young people. Many of them, 2 or 3 of them below the age of 18, live in her tiny matchbox of an apartment. She can be beaten up any day. And I think the stats on trans violence bear that out. They are in physical danger of violence, trans people.
No, that they are, yes. But what I wanted also to get about Shanti, one other thing, she's a Dalit.
Yes.
How did, I mean, you know, the one question I have after reading your entire book, the first question I'd like answered is, who was that official that left her in the room with 4 strangers?
I know the name, but I myself as an independent would invite trouble. I may not, maybe nobody will listen, but some case can be filed against me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so is it,
we had to remove, my publishers are sitting in the front row.
you had to remove his name?
Yes, we had to remove names. There's something called a legal read. So
as a government official paid on our taxes, his presence in an official capacity is not public knowledge? Shouldn't be public knowledge? I'm just
This
curious.
was an official from the Athletics Federation of India, actually. But of course, these federations, they do have official roles to play in international athletic meets. So I'm not sure whether, of course, some money was spent. I'm not sure whether it was Government of India money.
Okay,
I feel
fair enough.
quite, I will tell you, of
But
course.
for me, I'm enraged by this person's actions.
But
It
also,
literally-
the person who was in charge of Sai, incidentally a Malayali, if I'm not mistaken.
You can't give us their name either.
I should check the name and I should say, because that person also
No,
never
I'm
responded.
not digging for names, and I've been told on pain of death that I need to get the audience to ask questions.
Oh, we have time for questions.
There is, do we have mics? Angoto nodko.
Hi. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm Anand. By the way, I work in sport too. So my question is simple. I'm sorry. My question is simple. You talk about all the struggles that the women athletes have gone through these years, starting from 1914 till this day. And thank you so much for mentioning wrestlers' protest. Not a single person today or in the last 4 days mentioned wrestlers' protest in this event. So thank you so much for that. Now, my question is, does your book also talk about the need or the importance of safeguarding policy that should be in existence within the sport contest in India? Because I work in sport, and none of the national governing bodies in our country or the sport organizations or even the academies on a grassroots level have a safeguarding policy in place. So does your book talk about that
Sorry,
too?
a safeguard policy for?
For athletes. Safeguarding
runners.
policy for athletes.
Or for athletes?
Because we don't have a safeguarding officer, we don't have a national safeguarding officer, we don't have a safeguarding department in any of the sport countries.
No. Maybe I should have spoken with more people like you. But no.
Any more questions? We've left no time for questions. No, there's time, don't worry. There's somebody in the back there. Can we get a mic out to that person, please?
Excuse me, ma'am. We are running short of time, and I think we need to schedule.
Mr. Satyarthi is very busy signing books. Okay, so we've been told we have to cut the session short. Thank you, Sohini.
Thank you,
Great
Miriam.
presentation. Really good book, folks. Please go out and pick it up across the way. It's well worth a read. I really enjoyed it. It's also the kind of book you can read again and again, dip into. Really good read. Thanks a lot. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you.